In 2008, legendary game designer Matt Leacock came up with something that had never been done before with his hit title, Pandemic. He made a cooperative board game, where instead of players working against each other, they worked as a team toward a common goal, eradicating certain diseases spreading throughout the world. Players had their own abilities and cards and had to work in tandem to... Wait, hold on. This had absolutely been done before. In 2000, legendary game designer Reiner Knizia came up with something that had never been done before with his hit title, Lord of the Rings. He made a cooperative board game where instead of players working against each other, they worked as a team toward a common goal, destroying the One Ring and stopping darkness from spreading throughout the world. Players had their own abilities and cards and had to work in tandem to... No, that's not right either. In 1995, Warhammer Quest has each player take on the role of an adventurer. Arkham Horror, in 1978, video cabinet looking to 10 players. 1974, Sackson, in 1971, the new game board Groucho Marx's The Land Racing. Hello, welcome to my stock photo of a den. Let's take a deep breath and figure out the actual timeline and lineage of cooperative gaming, with an emphasis on modern, strategic, cooperative tabletop games. So pull up a seat, and let's start going way back and figure out what even is a cooperative game. The cooperative part, as I'm using it in this video, means that every single person involved in the active playing of the game is working toward the same common goal, and everyone either wins or loses together. Multiple people are involved, and they all succeed or fail as one, even if they have different roles within gameplay. So that means Catan, Password, NFL Football, Klondike Solitaire are generally not cooperative, but The Mind, Guitar Hero, and Jump Roping can be. Now, as far as what counts as a game, there are so many uses of that word. Some people call any fun item or activity a game, but I don't think that's going to work for me here. Otherwise, 2 8-year-olds running around a field is a cooperative game. I've got to be more strict here. There are countless definitions of what's a game, but I'm going to use what Katie Salen and Eric Zimmerman came up with in their 2003 book, Rules of Play. A game is a system in which players engage in an artificial conflict defined by rules that results in a quantifiable outcome. Artificial conflict here is any sort of struggle against anything at all, not just a conflict of the players against each other, and not toward a real-world aim, so no performing music or building a barn. A quantifiable outcome will mean determining a win, loss, draw, or other in-between degree of victory on a certain scale. I'm going to make a few distinctions here. It's grid time. I'm going to use activity for play with some structure and or rules, but without any quantifiable outcome. In tag, the it goes back and forth just endlessly until people want to stop, and no one is a winner or loser. Also consider building Legos freeform, trying to catch a butterfly, square dancing, The Sims, quilting circles, improv scenes. Play where you have a concrete goal you're working toward, but no failure state, I'm going to call a puzzle. That encompasses things like a jigsaw puzzle, a crossword puzzle, a Rubik's Cube, and Rush Hour, but also things with a finish line or aim, like a solo game of golf, recreational fishing, or running a mile. The only way that you can lose is to decide you don't want to play anymore. The naming convention's a little odd, but just stick with me. For play where you keep going as long as you can, where there's no victory state but there is a failure state, that I'll call a challenge. Playing Cat's Cradle, where people work together to manipulate a string into certain shapes, stopping once they've tangled the string into a shape they can't make into something else new, that would be a cooperative challenge. Consider you and a friend hitting a tennis ball for as long a rally as you can. Or a child walking down the aisle of a grocery store with a checkerboard floor who's trying to step only on the black tiles. Many video games fall in this realm as well. Consider classic arcade games like Donkey Kong and Pac-Man. technological limits like kill screens notwithstanding.
There's a potential Donkey Kong kill screen if you want to watch. If anybody wants to see, there's a Donkey Kong kill screen coming up. There's a Donkey Kong kill screen coming up if anybody wants to watch.
The point of the game is to keep going as long as possible. Finally, a competition needs to have rules, a victory state, and a failure state. Most competitive gaming counts here, from chess to Street Fighter to SETI, but you could also consider a county fair vegetable growing contest, or some siblings walking home until one declares, "Last one home's a rotten egg." Those are all competitions for my purposes here, and that's what I'm really interested in for this video. What's the first cooperative competition? Side note, many challenges or puzzles could shift into the competition range by adding an extra layer on top. Solving a Rubik's Cube becomes competitive if you and others are trying to solve it the fastest. You can declare yourself victorious at Donkey Kong if you set a new high score in your particular machine, or even a world record. I'm going to stick to the most essential form of each game throughout this though. So with that sorted, let's explore. What was the first cooperative competition game? The first place I thought to look was Parlor Games. These came in vogue in the 19th century, as some people began to have leisure time and a certain definition of proper behavior. Think 20 questions, charades, and I Spy. The kind of thing you don't need a box or board for.
A game, Fred.
Yeah, we must have a game at Christmas.
Do people play games at Christmas?
I love games.
So does a game of telephone count as a cooperative competition? The first person whispers a message to someone, and they try to whisper the same message to the next person, and so on, crossing to a number of people. And the final person says out loud what message they think they heard.
You know, I heard Skinner say the teachers will crack any minute.
Skinner said the teachers will crack any minute. Purple monkey dishwasher.
I guess you could call it a victory if the ending and beginning messages are the same, and a failure otherwise, but that's also the most disappointing outcome. And I doubt many groups would cheer on a victory in telephone. The joy is in the distortion of the message. At best, this is a borderline case of a game. I think this is really just a cooperative activity. Telephone has quite a legacy and has spawned more structured games like Telestrations. We'll put it on the timeline. Probably dates to the 1870s or so. I don't think this counts, but there probably is some cooperative, competitive parlor game out there that does fit. I just couldn't find one when I was searching. Any parlor game experts out there watching this? Please reach out, comment below. Let's move on to my next thought. Sports. Most sports involve a competition between two or more players or teams, either playing simultaneously or in turns. There are a few sports or activities that may count or come close to meeting our criteria. Double Dutch jump roping, for instance, has a group of people working to keep jumping through some ropes as long as possible. Or how about the Chinese game Jianzi, where players aim to keep an object in the air as long as possible. These are challenges, basically endurance trial that a group is performing together, which you can turn into competitions by setting a victory condition. Can you keep the kinja in the air for 100 hits? Can you get through all of ice cream, soda pop, cherry on top without screwing up? If we're counting sports like these, we can go back to at least the 3rd century BC, with the Han Dynasty's game of Kuju, a game vaguely resembling hacky sack. While they weren't always played to a certain goal, and not always played cooperatively, it did happen at least sometimes, so let's put it on the timeline. What I'm going to focus on most in this video is pre-packaged games with written rule sets. In the 1900s, Lizzie Magie created the first versions of the Landlord's game, most famous today for being the design that was stolen and ruined to become Monopoly. I won't delve into its history deeply here, but I strongly suggest Emma Bell Holland's fantastic video, linked below, where she talks about the game in depth, among other great topics about game mechanics as real-world metaphor. In short, Maggie's game is designed as a persuasive educational tool to advocate for Georgian economic policies and to show the torment of the existing capitalistic model of taxation and ownership. This intentionally miserable version became the model of the 1939 Monopoly. Now, Maggie made quite a few different rule sets for the Landlord's game over time, and the 1932 version involves an unusual twist. If, in playing the Monopoly-like rules of the Landlord's game, one person accumulates a large amount of wealth, the other players can decide together that they're going to flip the script and turn it into the Prosperity game. In this game, many of the punishing fees and taxes throughout the game are eliminated or reduced. Everyone's wealth goes up, and jail is abolished. Then the rules say,
when the player with the least money has $7,000, double his original capital, prosperity is achieved. The game may continue at the pleasure of the players.
Sounds to me like a cooperative victory. But in the Prosperity game, there isn't a loss condition. You just keep playing until someone gets the $7,000 amount. So close. Put you on the timeline as a borderline case. Now, of course, Monopoly has a huge legacy, though very much not in the space of cooperative games. But most strategy games they talk about from future decades will have at least some little bits of Monopoly in its ilk, even with no direct link, just kind of in the ether of, this is what a board game is. Inching forward a few years, we get something with a very different lineage. Let's visit the world of literature, specifically the whodunit novel. By the mid-1930s, a golden age of detective fiction had been going on for a while, with stories by Agatha Christie, Dorothy Sayers, Ngaio Marsh, and many others, leaving trails of clues for detective characters and their readers to piece together to find the truth. There were codified systems of how to write an appropriately satisfying, puzzly story. There were even books like Lassiter Wren and Randall McKay's Baffle Book, which offers most of a short detective story, and then asks readers to guess the ending, which is printed in a different part of the book, offering a scoring system for people to judge their mystery-solving capabilities. And there was Harry Stephen Keeler's The Marceau Case, which included photographs in addition to the novel text. This went one step further in 1936, when novelist Dennis Wheatley and his friend, a fur trader and travel guide author, J.G. Lynx, put together what they called a dossier, a cardboard folder that contained all the elements of a mystery novel, but not in the form of a novel. It put the reader, or player, or user, or whatever, in the role of the detective, by having them piece together news clippings, police reports, and pieces of evidence such as torn up photographs, fabric samples with fake blood splatters, paper scented with perfume, and locks of actual real-life human hair. The player, or players, would decide what they thought the solution was, and then check it against a sealed envelope or pages. Their first release, Murder Off Miami, was a success, so they put 3 more of these together, to diminishing returns, until World War II hit and there were other things to attend to. These dossiers were designed as puzzles, kind of. They were something that you could either be correct or incorrect about, so there is a conflict with a quantifiable outcome, but there really isn't anything that constitutes gameplay, really. No turns, no actions, no encounters, no turn to page 149 if you choose to pet the dolphin. Nothing. It's interactive in a different way than just a novel, but most of the action is purely in the heads of the players talking through the solution. So once again, this pesky definition of a game is getting us into a gray area. Board Game Geek counts it, but I'm gonna keep looking. Well, as we go forward in time, we find ourselves with new media, new capabilities. In the 1940s, we get what I believe to be the first cooperative game show, Groucho Marx's You Bet Your Life. Starting on radio in 1947 and moving to television a few years later, two contestants worked together to answer trivia questions, betting some of their winnings on each one. The game took a back seat to Groucho Marx's jokes and antics and interviews with the contestants.
We have 20 girls that ride Johnson all day long.
Johnson must get an awful lot of mail, huh? Why do they ride Johnson? I happen to know Johnson. He can't even read. Besides that, he's a married man.
Well,
Does Mrs. Johnson get wind of this?
No, but Johnson has all the necessary loops and swirls and straight lines.
If you think Johnson has them, you should see Mrs. Johnson. It's been an experience talking to you two. But I'm sure you'd be much more interested in winning some money, wouldn't you, Tom?
But there was definitely a game, and there were no opponents beyond the house. The participants are working together, with the host, announcer, and audience taking on a neutral role facilitating or observing the game. There was also a bonus question at the end for whichever couple earned the most in their portion of the game, but I won't disqualify the show for that. Shortly afterward, Beat the Clock also involved teams of two performing mild stunts like knocking over bowling pins with a frisbee or moving cups of water without using their hands. Think Nickelodeon's Double Dare physical challenges, but more boring. Their opponent was, well, the titular clock that they had to beat. Now, TV and radio shows aren't something that the majority of people could just decide to play one day, unless they owned the home game. And in 1954, we get what may be the least ambiguous instance of a cooperative competition board game so far. The Beat the Clock home game.
And also, you can play Beat the Clock right in your own house when you're entertaining guests, because from Hazel Bishop also, a Beat the Clock game.
The box comes with a bunch of props, a clock to beat, and a book of 40 stunts to perform, along with the general rules of play. The structure is pretty scant, but there is a judging framework, and a way to win, and a way to lose. It's largely a dexterity game rather than a strategic one, but I think we can call this a clear, non-borderline, cooperative competition game. Let's get some trophies out. But calling it a tabletop game, a bit of a stretch, and a bit of an evolutionary dead end. Very few dexterity games are cooperative, and vice versa. So, let's move up a decade. Here, I'm finding two more items that are closer to novelties than clear predecessors of Pandemic, but still worth noting. The first, configuration. This is a very dry-looking set of mathematical puzzles, packaged in the manner of board games at the time. Each card has a configuration of dots and lines, and you place plastic numbers in certain configurations to obey rules about what numbers can and can't go in certain places. It's actually a bit Sudoku-ish. Its own advertising calls it both a puzzle and a game. In fact, let's look at the back of the box because it cracks me up a bit. Enlisting its target audiences, the student, the serviceman, the active-minded senior citizen, and the hospital patient. Wow. But really, there's no gameplay in this. It's as much a game as a Rubik's Cube. This falls squarely in the puzzle spot of the grid. The second of the 60s, the Captain Scarlet game, the fight with the Mysterons. This game is based on Captain Scarlet and the Mysterons, a British children's television show of the 60s, which, to my American eyes, went bold in the three main categories of entertainment: marionettes, timpani, and video editing. In the board game, the players take on the roles of Captain Scarlet, Captain Blue, Captain Ochre, and Lieutenant Green, moving around Europe to protect southern Yugoslavia from Martians. Classic. The gameplay involves rolling dice and spinning a spinner to move around, collect information, and take out enemies. It seems very low strategy and generally quite boring, but I shouldn't judge 60s kids games too harshly by modern standards. Its box does boldly, and I'd say accurately state that this is a unique type of game, and even points out that it comes with rules to play at solitaire, which is pretty neat for its time. A light strategy game, but a cooperative strategy game, unambiguously a competition game. I think we have it, the granddaddy of all strategic cooperative tabletop games. Kinda. This game didn't leave an impact. It was a TV tie-in game that had very little appeal outside its home country, didn't spawn any trend, didn't infiltrate the culture in any way. It's one of those, well, technically, answers that simultaneously is interesting and unsatisfying.
You are technically correct. The best kind of correct.
What was more relevant at the time? Wargaming. Strategy games moved forward in a big way in the 1950s with the popularization of tabletop wargaming, from Tactics by Avalon Hill in 1954 to Risk by Parker Brothers in 1959. As we move into the 1960s, we see wargaming flourish on a range from highly abstracted to highly technical, with some intensely detailed war simulation games finding attention amongst a devoted subset of gamers. As you may guess, wargaming is very rarely cooperative due to the whole war aspect. But in the early 1970s, we start to see two branches emerge that come into play for us. The first, solo wargaming. Starting in 1973 to 74, with titles like The Fall of Rome, Wolfpack, and Operation Olympic, we see strategy games for one person with a scripted opponent to beat, taking predefined or randomly determined moves for the player to counteract. These don't count as cooperative games due to their solitaire nature, but they're an important predecessor. Many future cooperative games will have opponents take algorithmic turns in a similar way to how these games handle it. The other important development coming out of 1970s wargaming, you may have guessed already. Gary Gygax and Jeff Perrin had developed a set of rules for medieval army combat in 1971 called Chainmail that included both full army and man-to-man combat. They also included a fantasy supplement inspired by the works of Tolkien and others to add wizards, elves, and dragons into your adventure. By 1974, this fantasy supplement and the single-unit combat rules had spun off into their own novel kind of work, the first commercially successful role-playing game, Dungeons and Dragons. As would soon become the norm in RPGs, one person is running the game and leading the others on some adventure or story, with rules on how interactions in combat are resolved. Now, are party-based RPGs cooperative? Well, it depends on the people at the table. Especially for the first few decades of RPGs, the person running the game, sometimes called a referee, but more commonly called a game master or dungeon master, could be seen as an adversary to the other people at the table. After all, they are controlling every enemy, every monster, every aspect of the cruel world they have to face. Sometimes their goal was to kill as many player characters as they could get away with. But on the other hand, as is more commonly seen in the last few decades, the role of the GM is to make a fun experience for everyone at the table.
I think winning is less important than the overall experience. This is, after all, something that challenges the imagination and exercises the mind and creativity in problem solving. And so I guess everyone feels that they win if they survive.
But even if it is cooperative, an RPG's open nature doesn't fit the strict definition of a competition game that I'm looking at for my purposes. I don't know that you can win a game of Dungeons and Dragons in the same way that someone can win Pandemic. I think once you do that, you've left the realm of RPGs a bit. And depending on the system, the use of imagination and creativity makes things less rules tight than what is generally considered a board game. People can debate, and have debated, this distinction ad nauseum. But I'm going to consider D&D and similar RPGs as an important step in the evolution of co-op games, but not really a co-op game in the way I'm considering. The world of solo wargaming also brought forth some games from publisher SPI that are best played solitaire, but do have rule support for multiple players splitting the responsibility for the characters. Take, for example, 1979's Death Maze, Heroic Adventures in the Corridors of Doom. Besides just an outstanding title, the game has 1 to 6 players taking on the roles of some number of characters, crawling through a randomly generated dungeon, taking out enemies, and getting treasure and experience. Kind of an early attempt to turn an RPG experience into a board game. The ideal number of characters to ensure victory is somewhere in the 4 to 6 range, and so in general, players are expected to control multiple characters. This was also the case for The Wreck of the BSM Pandora, The Return of the Stainless Steel Rat, and Dawn of the Dead. The current consensus, from what I can glean from Board Game Geek polls, is that these are best played as solitaire experiences. And there's nothing particularly gained by splitting what one player could do into multiple people's roles. But fun factor isn't my determining factor. These will go on the timeline as cooperative competition games. RPGs can feel like an everyone versus one experience, but the 1970s saw the advent of board games that were literally just that. Predating D&D, 1973's Escape from Colditz is a fun romp where most of the players are prisoners of war, trying to escape from a notorious Nazi camp, and one player must be the German security officer, keeping them from escaping. Woo!
The 3 younger people were like getting all excited, listing game after game after game, and the first thing that David mentions is a game that no one's heard of about the Scourge of the Nuts.
You'll see some sources calling these cooperative games, despite the fact that one player is pitted against the others. There is cooperation, but it's not complete cooperation. It's one versus many, a different genre. Escape from Colditz was the first notable title in this genre. And in the 1980s, we saw a few more big entries to this, it's not really cooperative, but it's pretty close, genre. Scotland Yard in 1983 was a huge one. And shortly after, you'll see Shadows in the Forest in 1985, and The Fury of Dracula in 1987. None of these are up to the guidelines so far, but I've left the 70s too soon. There's still a lot to see. All this war and fighting in the 70s, we need to find ways to get together, man. Conflict in itself isn't bad, says the New Games Foundation, starting in the 1970s by Stewart, the counterculture author behind the Whole Earth catalog, who was looking for ways for people to channel and express their expressive tendencies in ways that wouldn't harm others. According to him, so much of the competition in the country was far away overseas, or by professional sports teams which have a tiny number of people playing compared to the vast majority just sitting and watching. Brought to fruition by Pat Farrington, the new games were relatively unstructured games with a focus on physicality, full participation, and the joy of playing rather than winning, with a down-to-earth mindset. The games often had technically competitive rules, but played with a cooperative mindset. For example, here's a description of the first game of Earthball, as told by Dale Lefebvre.
After the ball was inflated, without choosing teams, Stewart announced that there are 2 kinds of people in the world, those who want to push the earth over the row of flags at the end of the field, and those who want to push it over the fence at the other end. Go for it. There was ample competition as the ball moved back and forth on the field, but curiously, as the ball approached a goal, players from the winning side would start to help the losers. After an hour, there was still no score. There seemed to be an agreement just to keep playing hard and just for fun.
Check out this article from a 1979 Time magazine. They start by describing the new game's game, Vampire Blob.
Vampire Blob is a tag game. Anyone tagged with a monk bite on the neck joins hand with the biter and becomes part of the monster. Psychologist John O'Connell, 29, co-director of the New Games Foundation, wants to see the nation playing less baseball and more blob. Says he, in traditional team games like baseball, it usually becomes apparent halfway through the game who the winners and losers will be. Then the losers play badly and have a miserable time. But O'Connell and the Foundation want to restructure these time-honored sports activities so that everyone plays and no one loses. In a version of New Volleyball, the aim is to keep the ball from hitting the ground rather than to score points by singing it at the feet of opponents across the net. Says Jeff McKay, a San Francisco teacher and baseball coach who subscribes to the Foundation's theory of no winners or losers. If the game doesn't fit the players, we change the game, not the players.
Well, that's a different philosophy than we'd seen before. Are these new games going to fit the criteria I'm looking for? Not generally. Looking through my copy of the New Games book, really the majority games do involve keeping score or competing in one way or another. Not all of them. People Pyramids, for example, is simply making a human pyramid, topped with what the book calls one very light expendable child. So, while they have a philosophy of cooperation and a focus away from individual victory, they're just a step on this journey we're on. New Games, incidentally, is still chugging along, focusing on events at schools, youth groups, and corporate outings. There's even a video on adapting New Games to COVID-era Zoom calls. I sort of want to do a whole deep dive into them. It seems like a fascinating group and mindset, but this video's long enough without it, and they really aren't part of the tabletop space. Instead of the deep dive, I will leave you with some of the activity names from the book. Tweezily Wop, Boffing, Schmerltz, Hunker Hosser, Smaug's Jewels, Lummy Sticks, Clench a Wench, Ooh Ah, Prooey, and the ever-popular Bug Tug. If we go back to that Time article a bit further down, there's this interesting tidbit.
Another pundit of New Games is sports psychologist Terry Orlick, 33, of the University of Ottawa. He thinks that the Foundation has not gone far enough. He notes, for example, that the Foundation's tug-of-war encourages players to switch sides to prevent a victory. Orlick, in his new Cooperative Sports Games books, promotes a tug of peace, in which children are arrayed not in two teams pulling against each other at the opponent's ends of a single rope, but hauling at various ropes to form stars, triangles, and other designs. Orlick has even invented a cooperative version of musical chairs and a tame version of the board game Monopoly, called Community. Says Orlick, we've become fixated on numerical outcomes of games. Losers feel rejected, not worthy. The point is to have fun interacting, not to put someone else down.
Terry Orlick's book, noted there, 1978's The Cooperative Sports and Games book, contains rules and descriptions for a wide variety of mostly outdoor or gymnasium-based, child-oriented activities, focused on inclusivity and good feelings. Some are cooperative adaptations of traditionally competitive activities. Many require no or minimal equipment, and many are playable by any number of participants. Here's a typical entry. Ladder travel. Lots of people lift up a ladder, bench, or plank. They lower one end, someone steps or crawls onto it. They lift it back up. The traveler reaches the other side, the group lowers the other end. The traveler gets off and holds the ladder for someone else to take their turn. Or Big Snake. Children lay down on their stomachs, one grabs the ankle of the person in front of them, and then more people join on and the chain of people moves around without letting go. Sure, all right. Very strongly in the activity category for a lot of these, with the occasional game that does have winning and losing. For example, Pin, which he lists as a traditional Guatemalan game. A wooden pin stands vertically, a moderate distance from a group of people. One person throws or rolls a ball near it. The others work to throw other balls at that first one, to get the first ball to touch, but not knock over, the pin. The book's quite well sourced, with pages of research findings, and a nice set of resources to check out for more information. They even recommend the New Games book, and have adapted some of those activities. Cool book for group activities, especially with kids, but a bit of a detour on the quest for cooperative competition games. Let's get back indoors, and we'll see a few cooperative pursuits also rooted in this same philosophy. Family Pastimes was founded by Jim and Ruth Deacove in Canada in 1971. From a 2009 interview, Jim noted a turning point in his outlook on games when his children joined some others in cooperatively choosing a game and then competitively playing it.
A whole new scene emerges. The kids are aggressive. They push each other around. Strength is used to dominate. They pick on each other's weaknesses, exploiting them for their own advantage. What I am witnessing is a change from consensus to confrontation. I begin to wonder what would happen if the nature of their decision-making process were transferred into the game situation itself.
Jim then improvises a variation on hide and seek, where anyone that's found helps find the people still hiding. It's a rousing success. He loves what he sees. His philosophy?
Our initial impulse to play a game is social. That is, we bring out a game because we want to do something together. So how ironic it is that in most games we spend all that energy and effort trying to bankrupt someone, destroy their armies, or in other words, we try to get rid of the very people we just invited over to play with. If we can play a game that develops and not defeats that social impulse, well, then everyone feels better for it.
He creates some games and tries to sell ideas to existing game companies.
Anyway, off I went with my Harvest Time game to Toronto, where many major game manufacturers were located. I remember well my first appointment with a company head who liked the idea, but said it needed more edge, some conflict to appeal to the market. He suggested that if one of the neighbors was getting ahead of you in harvesting their veggies, that a player should introduce something, like a groundhog, into that neighbor's garden to slow him or her down. I was shocked. He was serious, folks. I tried to talk him into reality, pointing out that if I did that to my neighbor's garden, why, he would come after me with a shotgun. The company head just didn't get it.
The first Family Pastimes release was Together. Hey look, the cover even calls it a cooperative trademarked game. This game puts each player in the role of a leader of a nation or similar group of people. Everyone has certain resources that they can use to solve problems that come up. Famine, slavery, poverty. These problems are resolved through discussion and diplomacy, rather than through any Eurogame-like strategic resource manipulation. This appears to be more like an educational conversation starter than a competitive game. This framework of conversations and the trapping of a board game would find a much more popular foothold a couple years later, when The Ungame made waves. While it has the framework of a game, it has neither winners nor losers, and is really little more than a collection of touchy-feely questions packaged with a board. What the Deacoves did goes further than that. Family Pastimes' website lists dozens and dozens of different titles in a number of categories. There are Board Game Geek entries for 121 games from this publisher, regularly released from 1971 all the way through the COVID era. I found a 2021 article saying that they were selling the business after 50 successful years. 1972's Community appears to be the earliest release that fits my guidelines of a cooperative competition game. Moving around a path, Monopoly style, the players work to enhance their collective community by improving recreation, industry, necessities, education, and inner life. Players aim to get rid of all their bad feeling cards by covering them with love or unity. Players can have meetings, go to the dining hall to, as the rules say, share a meal with a brother, and build up businesses. The players win if all the traits are fully improved, and they lose if everyone is stuck unable to help any further. Strategy seems a bit light, with movement handled Candyland style, but this is a clear-cut early example of a fully cooperative competition game. Bring out the trophy. As I mentioned, Family Pastimes made games for 50 years, ranging from conversational tools to actual competitions. Some of the titles that have gotten the most attention are 1980's Harvest Time, the aforementioned gardening game that publishers had turned down; 1986's Max, where the players tried to protect a chipmunk, bird, and mouse from Max the cat. And don't worry, it's clear from the game's text that Max can't help himself. He's a natural hunter, so he's no real villain. 1991's The Secret Door, a cooperative memory variant. And 1998's Caves and Claws, where a group of jungle explorers seeks out artifacts, taking out monsters using the power of smelly socks. Their output is mostly children's games, as you might have deduced. But I have to give a lot of credit. Almost no one else was making stuff like this for a long time. The Deacoves were successful enough to keep the company afloat for decades, and seem to be very clear on their principles and reasons, so good on them, even if I have no personal desire to play, say, Let's Go Sugaring. Here's one more quote on Jim's thoughts on cooperative games from that 2009 interview from before.
My games are outside of the usual win-lose paradigm. There is usually an objective to be realized, but I don't specify that if you achieve the objective, then you all win, and if you don't achieve the objective, then you all lose. What I do state is that at the end of the game, you determine how far along you got. How many vegetables did you store away before winter set in? How far up the mountain did you get before you had to return home? Thus, there's always a measure of success to celebrate. This is more like real life and out of the box of rewards and punishments.
Along somewhat similar lines, we have one of the 70s-ist board games I've ever seen, Save the Whales. Designed by Ken and Jann Kolsbunn and published in 1978, the object of the game, well, let the manual do the talking.
Very few games are based on cooperation. However, in this game, all players work together, trying to save 8 whales. Your goal is to beat the system, the worldwide focus which is causing our great whales to become endangered species and extinct. The only way you can really win this game is to save all 8 whales. However, this is a game of fun, so enjoy yourself while trying to do the very best you can.
The players have to move whales to the Marine Mammal Protection Act space and pay the system to protect that species and keep it in its natural habitat. The first 8 pages of the manual, after a dedication to Greenpeace, contain the rules of the game, and the next 22 pages are about whales, the various threats they face, and ways to help. There's also a section about the family game company who made this, called Animal Town, and a bit of their philosophy.
Most games, including board games, and toys needlessly promote violence and competition and distort human values. Many glorify the military, the automobile culture, space exploration, computer technology, real estate, TV and movie celebrities. Rarely will you find games which honor old Mother Nature, peace, artists, poets, or humanitarians. We are trying to help reverse this trend. Our games extol the virtues of cooperation, simplicity, self-sufficiency, conservation, and the plain, old-fashioned good life.
It's nearing cliché levels of hippie here, but hey, I respect it. Animal Town was later absorbed into another company after producing a handful of not immensely successful cooperative games, Nectar Collector and Dam Builders among them. And oh, I love this. Duraflame, the makers of Fire Logs, sponsored Animal Town on a month-long media tour to promote the idea of families playing board games around the fireplace. That's nice. Beyond Animal Town, Ken Kolsbunn participated in anti-war rallies, promoted safe bikeways, and made a name for himself as an expert on the history of the peace symbol. The Deacoves and the Kolsbunns were both outsiders to the gaming space who wanted to shake up the status quo of gaming. Before we leave the 70s, there's one insider who wanted to do the same. Board game legend Sid Sackson, the man behind Acquire, Can't Stop, Bizarre, Sleuth, Samarkand, and over 100 others, made a series of board game books in the 1970s. Beyond Words, Beyond Solitaire, Beyond Competition, Beyond Tic-Tac-Toe, and Calculate. Come on, Sid, couldn't do Beyond Numbers? Each of these books provides the rules and board for several simple games, with the players asked to provide simple components like playing cards, dice, pencils, or tokens. None of the games within these books have become classics, but they did push some boundaries. Beyond Competition includes the following in the introduction.
I know that to most of us, the fun of playing a game is in the competition, in the excitement of beating one or more opponents and coming out on top. For some time, I felt it's necessary to attempt to go beyond this concept of competition, to substitute the challenge of cooperating to overcome obstacles. The 6 games in this book are the result. In some of the games, the cooperation is against an imminent peril, such as being stranded in space or the outbreak of a disastrous war. In others, the cooperation is to achieve a worthwhile goal, such as an equitable sharing of resources or the rescue of persons in danger. In all of the games, in order for the group to have a chance of winning, each player must realize how his play affects all the others, and, unless the rules specifically prohibit, the options should be discussed in a search for the best play.
He goes on to add,
a final note, these games are for fun, which hopefully will bring pleasure to the players. But on this ever-shrinking Earth, unless all peoples learn to play the important games cooperatively, so that all can win, all will certainly lose.
Fun. The games in Beyond Competition are more strategy-based insider art than most of what we talked about before. We're past those who wish people wouldn't be so mean in Scrabble and Tug of War. We have a seasoned designer, iterating on his own expertise. Peace Conference is a bit of a mind game, where players are trying to play cards that are near others in value but not match them, with no communication allowed. Space Explorer has players playing cards to fly a spaceship that has to reach each of the planets of our solar system, spending fuel with each card they play, again with no communication. Round Round is very abstractly puzzly, with players taking it in turn to color in a series of spaces in a spiral grid, and avoid having adjacent spaces in different rings share a color. In Rescue, players move around an abstract grid to rescue people at various locations. Resources has people moving around in a grid and collecting resources, aiming to have each player have about the same amount of grain, steel, coal, and oil as each other. And in Search, the stated objective is to move through the rooms of a haunted house in search of a mysterious substance called dots, but to avoid being a pig by getting many more dots than anyone else. Scoring is similar to Resources in that you want to have everyone collect a lot of dots, but have only a small difference between the most and fewest across players. Sid Sackson isn't credited with any other cooperative games outside this collection, but these absolutely seem like skeletons of other communication-restricted, resource-based, strategic cooperative games of decades to come. And despite the overall thematic aim of people learning how to cooperate in a general sense, there isn't any specific educational or ideological aim to this collection. Something that will be the norm going forward, although from time to time these explicitly opinionated games will pop up. So, let's take a step back, shall we? In the tabletop realm, we have a 50s dexterity game that's a game show tie-in, a 60s roll and move that's a puppet show tie-in, a book-bound collection of abstract games by a legend in the 70s, some educational/ideological games explicitly promoting ideals of ecology and community building, some RPG offshoots, and various collections of children's activities aimed to subvert the evils of baseball and hide-and-seek. We've got various games that are in the arena of cooperative competitions, but not quite there. RPGs, solitaire war games, everyone versus one games. Right now, it's a ragtag group with no cohesion. But as we leave the 70s and get into the 80s and 90s, finally we'll start to see things start to explode a bit. But for now, let's pause here. You can come back and visit me next time here at my stock photo of a den. Thanks for stopping by.
Amoeba race, aura, ball crawl, blob, boffing, bola, bone game, British bulldog, bug tug, catch the dragon's tail, caterpillar, shoot ball, clench a wench, do, earth ball, earth volley, eco ball, egg toss, flying Dutchman, fox and squirrel, fraha, frisbee golf, go tag, Great Plains, hagoo, hug tag, human pinball, hunker hosser, islands, knots, lap game, lummy sticks, mating game, new frisbee, new volleyball, ooh ah, orbit, parachute games, people pass, people pyramids, pieing, pina, planet pass, Pruy, rattlers, red-handed, rock paper scissors, schmerltz, Siamese soccer, skin the snake, slaughter, Smaug's jewels, snake in the grass, spirals, standoff, stand up, tug of war, tweezly wop, vampire, water slide.